It is indeed such a pleasure to be with you right here on India Tonight with every breaking news that matters at 9 p.m. this evening. I'm Supriya Srinath.
Hi there, I'm Sandeep Gurmurthy, and straight to this mega news break that's an ET Now exclusive. It's the biggest tax break of 2016, and it's an all-out war between the government and Vodafone within weeks after the British telco rejected the government's truce call to settle the $2 billion capital gains tax dispute. The centre has now moved Supreme Court challenging the Bombay High Court order in the transfer pricing case, the 8,500 crore rupee transfer pricing case. ET Now learns that the government has filed a special leave petition, or an SLP, which will come up for hearing pretty soon.
It's a U-turn of sorts as far as the Modi administration is concerned, which had earlier decided not to challenge the High Court order that was in favour of Vodafone. Now, interestingly, the decision is also in contrast with Finance Minister Arun Jaitley's repeated assurances to end tax terrorism here in India. In fact, Jaitley had even announced a one-time offer to settle all retrospective tax cases, mainly aimed at giving Vodafone a window to settle the case. The government's move on Vodafone transfer pricing case is sure to create a huge controversy. What will the repercussions of that move be? And what exactly has the government done? And more importantly, the rationale behind that move. That's the big and the top story right here on India Tonight.
And breaking that story on India Tonight this evening is Ashwin Mohan joining us live from our breaking news desk in Mumbai. Ashwin, this has come as a huge surprise for everyone here because we've seen repeated assurance from the government that they will end tax terrorism, that they will not take aggressive steps against multinationals. And now we've seen them actually file an SLP in complete contrast to the stated position as well in this particular case, which is that they will not move a higher court. What explains this change of stance, and what are you picking up?
Well, what I'm picking up from sources is that they have indeed, as you correctly pointed out, filed a special leave petition at the Supreme Court that challenges an earlier order that has been passed by the Bombay High Court. This, of course, was in the 8,500 crore transfer pricing spat. Now, the million-dollar question is, last year, they decided not to pursue the case which they lost at the Bombay High Court at the Supreme Court, and that, of course, was in the share premium cases. This is also an equally big case. It's 8,500 crore rupees. It forms part of that $2 billion tax tussle which has been pending since 2007. Now, why have they gone ahead and filed an SLP at the Supreme Court? One aspect that needs to be kept in mind is that as far as the legal history of this case is concerned, even though the government might have lost this case at the Bombay High Court, let's not forget that there was a lower tribunal, which is the Income Tax Appellate Tribunal. That tribunal had in fact ruled in favor of the government in this case. And this case is, of course, about the transfer of put and call options regarding the sale of Vodafone's domestic call center business. And the tax tribunal had ruled that the department did indeed have jurisdiction to proceed and in fact collect that 8,500 crore rupees. So clearly that seems to have in fact convinced at least some of the legal advice that has gone into filing this SLP. What we do understand is that there were 3 legal opinions that were taken on this SLP and whether or not it should be filed from Mumbai. Those three legal opinions, of course, were in favor because of the favorable tax tribunal order. Then, of course, the case went up all the way to Delhi. Senior legal officials also vetted this particular proposal. The government knew it was going to be a controversial move, but of course, if you do have an order that is favorable to you, then logic would suggest that you would like to, in fact, not avoid taking it to the logical conclusion, which is, of course, fighting it out at the top court. So that seems to be at least one of the drivers behind this important filing, which is the SLP. Of course, it, in fact, throws open an entirely new angle to the Vodafone controversy between the government, because just recently the Vodafone in fact came out with a lukewarm response to the government's offer to settle retro tax cases. They've gone ahead. They are still arguing over the appointment of a third arbitrator at the International Court of Justice. So the timing is coming at a really, really bad time. And of course, let's not forget that once this case in fact goes to the Supreme Court, then of course we can look forward to much more litigation.
I was going to ask you that if the retrospective tax lukewarm response has had any role to play in this. I think you've answered that question, but we will take it across to a conversation that Ashwin did have with Anu Dutt, who represents Vodafone and the company's side of this big story.
What do you make of this move? Because clearly Vodafone had quite a resounding victory at the Bombay High Court, wherein the High Court had ruled that the tax department has no jurisdiction to proceed against you as far as this 8,500 crore transfer pricing case was concerned.
Actually, I am a little surprised because I thought that government was in a conciliatory mood, and these option transaction were part of the main transaction itself, and it has been part of the main judgment also. So we are a little surprised to hear this news that they have filed. But let's see. I mean, now that they have filed it, we'll have to fight it.
One more interesting aspect is that this filing of the special leave petition also comes at a time when there are several aspects wherein Vodafone and the government haven't exactly been able to arrive at a middle ground. In fact, there was a difference of opinion over the appointment of an arbitrator as far as the overseas proceedings in the main tax case are concerned. Of course, there was also, as I was mentioning earlier, a provision in the budget for Vodafone to settle this tax case once and for all. But as far as the UK giant is concerned, in response to that budget proposal, there was a very lukewarm response, in fact, not really indicating whether they will go ahead for this window. What do you make of the timing of this move, ma'am? Because it comes at a time when there are several aspects connected to this long pending case which are still up in the air.
See, that's what we are a little surprised because we thought that, the budget did make a conciliatory move. And Vodafone, I mean, I don't think Vodafone had made up its mind at all because it's still a proposal. Once the budget was passed and there was some, more clarity as to what this would, how this would play out, probably Vodafone would have taken a decision. But, as I said to you, this matter of Bombay High Court concerned options, and options were a part of the main judgment itself. So what effect this will have, what implication it will have to the move that government was trying to make will have to be, examined now.
That's Anu Dutt in conversation with Ashwin just a short while ago, but we've got another special guest joining us on the phone line. Mukesh Bhutani joins in as well on the phone line from Delhi. Mukesh, always a pleasure chatting with you. What do you make of this move? How surprised are you by this government's move to file an SLP on the transfer pricing case, a case where there was a stated position that they will not challenge the Bombay High Court order? What do you make of this move? What explains this to you?
I don't know if the reference that the government made that they will not challenge the order was specifically to the case that Vodafone's lawyers, Ms. Anuradha, that talked about. I think that was Vodafone had two disputes on transfer pricing before the Bombay High Court. One was on the share issuance transaction, and second was on whether domestic transfer pricing provisions apply to a transaction on sale on the call center at a time when the legislature did not have a domestic transaction meeting the arm's length standard. And I think you're referring to the latter. So the Bombay High Court, in a well-reasoned judgment, conclusively held that the transaction for call center was not exigible to domestic transfer pricing provision, and hence the arm's length standard should not apply. So I think it is that decision that Vodafone won in the Bombay High Court, to which the government seems to be indicating its desire to move the Supreme Court through the special leave petition.
Mukesh, very quickly, do you believe the fact that Vodafone cold-shouldered the budget proposal to settle the retrospective tax has perhaps, resulted in this move? Because, I mean, everybody here in North Block and New Delhi knows that Vodafone was very keen to make this transfer pricing case a part of the retro tax settlement. The government was never keen on that. Do you believe that cold shouldering has had some role to play in this? Government not ready to call it truce just yet?
Well, I think that you should really ask this question to the people who have inside view of North Block as to what has gone in government's mind to pursue an SLP in the Supreme Court or possibly to Vodafone or Vodafone's lawyers. But yes, the newspaper media did suggest that Vodafone, as a part of the larger settlement on the retrospective law, wanted to settle this case as well. But I would imagine that the government will take an independent view because it's a case independent of the retrospective law, and they, in their wisdom, may decide to pursue the matter further in the Supreme Court. So I don't know whether I'm, competent to answer your question, but, because it could be too speculative if I say anything about it.
Its own wisdom notwithstanding, but what happens to all the truce talk, to all the talk about how companies will not be targeted and there is not going to be any tax terror? The fact is that there is a potent judgment that Vodafone is armed with as far as the Bombay High Court is concerned. What was then the need to pursue this case in the Supreme Court, despite having second thoughts about it in the first place itself? What happens to all the talks about ending tax terror, Mukesh?
Well, at a very general level, if there is a matter arising out of a High Court judgment, the Union of India is well within its right to file an SLP in the Supreme Court. So I'm sure that the government, before taking a decision, would have weighed the consequences, sought an opinion from the law officer to take a call. But yes, from a perception point of view, I agree with you that if there is a well-reasoned judgment of the Bombay High Court, of a High Court rather for that matter, then the government should apply due discretion and weigh the consequences of an appeal because it is a well-reasoned judgment. But I don't think one can stop the Union of India pursuing this matter in the Supreme Court. But yes, from a perception point of view, people just wonder whether the government is walking the talk and whether it means what it says.
So you do believe that this is going to create a controversy out there, this is going to create doubts about whether the government is willing to walk the talk or not. At least that is something that you agree with us.
Well, any law that is laid down by the High Court is not the law of the land until the time you get a stamp of approval from the Supreme Court. So perhaps filing an appeal or pursuing the SLP route would be one way of making sure that that becomes the law of the land. But in my view, it's a well-reasoned judgment in Vodafone's favor, and it conclusively says that there is no question of applying domestic transfer pricing, and I agree with that judgment.
You agree with that judgment, and I think so do the larger community that you belong to, but the government in its whatever right or wrong wisdom has chosen to go ahead and not let this case be. Initially, they had decided to, but thank you very much, Mukesh Bhatani, for joining us this evening with your take on this. Ashwin Mohan, if I may let you have the final word on this case for breaking that big story. I want you to answer the question, what are legal experts and what are tax experts telling you at this stage? How much of a role has the retrospective tax or the non-settlement there played into this?
Supriya, clearly one big aspect that has been talked about since that big window for retro tax cases came in the budget was that Vodafone is clearly the biggest case in terms of quantum. So even though Vodafone was asked to pay 9,000 crore rupees, which of course is the principal, and the remaining amount would be waived off, 9,000 crore rupees is still a big amount for Vodafone, and it's an international company. It has to take permission from shareholders, other stakeholders. There are several other retrospective tax cases also, but in those cases, the quantum is low. And clearly, Vodafone's entire defense seemed to be that we in fact are not in consonance with the entire tax demand. So therefore, if you ask us to pay part of it and you let go of the remaining part, that's almost like a partial retrospective tax levy. That seems to be the bone of contention. But the important aspect is, I've been speaking to a few tax experts since we broke the story, and they seem to suggest that with instances like this, one is tempted to ask, is there an apparent disconnect in terms of the policy tone at the top and the execution at the ground? That seems to be in fact something that is being repeated off and off again.
But this is a decision that was taken at the highest level. I don't think this case could have been pursued in the Supreme Court if it did not have the blessings right at the top. So I don't think there's a disconnect, at least in this case, whether the execution at the ground level is concerned and the men at the top. I think the decision was made at the top. Vodafone has reasons to worry about at this point in time. Sandeep.
That's right, Ashwin. Thanks for breaking that big story right here on India Tonight.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/ETNow and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at ETNowLive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/user/ETNow.